I think I'd like to give them 1 more minute, and then we will kick into action. Right, welcome to you all. As many of you know, I'm Richard Beynon, and flanking me, on my left at least, on the screen, is Joanne Richards. We've both been running All About Writing for too long to tell you about, but many, 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 many years. Okay, I'm going to start without preamble. We've had an awful lot of questions from you, and I'm going to launch right into the heart of the matter, which is to say, the beginning. So, a number of you asked, I don't know if you can hear that, but of all the times that it was possible for some workmen to do some work on the outside of our house, they chose this moment, and there's nothing we can do about it. So if it's disturbing you, I apologize. It's disturbing me. The big question, as I said, is how do you begin? Where do you begin? What do you begin with? What are you going to write? It's a question that Louise de Morillac specifically posed, but a number of you asked questions that revolve around the same theme. How to begin, how to find time to write, the very basics of the writing practice. Deciding what to write, of course, in the first place is all important. Now, we're surrounded by stories. Over any given dinner table or dinner party table, people exchange stories by the bucketful. Many of these might strike you as stories worth elaborating. Newspapers are full of real-life stories. Events around the world are continually throwing up potential stories. What's happening in the United States at the moment is going to generate, I guarantee it, a lot of novels. So some writers deliberately take these subjects that have captured the public imagination, and have explored these within fictional settings in their novels. But let's for a moment imagine that you've not written anything substantial yet. Perhaps you've kept a journal or a diary. You've played with the idea of something big, a novel, a memoir, but you hesitate because you're not sure whether you should tell this story or that story. And actually, if you're writing a memoir, there are many stories, possible stories that you could tell, drawn from your life. Now, invariably, a writer's first novel, if it's a novel, will contain more autobiographical elements than her second or third or 15th novel. And that's not surprising for obvious reasons. My first, and alas, unpublished novel was in fact based on incidents from my childhood. In it, I created two characters as the protagonist's sisters. This angered one of those sisters hugely. She said, "Where's Margaret?" mentioning my third sister. And I explained that I'd written a novel, and so I wasn't following all of the facts from my life. And it didn't placate her for an instant. But I wrote that novel because I'd been thinking about it for a few years. And I know that Joanne wrote her first novel, her roast chicken novel, The Innocence of Roast Chicken, because that one had been on her mind for a number of years. And we both were passionate about writing that first novel. And that is the key to, I think, any decision about a first major work that you might embark on. And that is passion. What stories light your fire? What stories excite you? I don't think this means that they have to be emotional excitement. It can be intellectual excitement. Although, of course, almost by definition, if you're excited, there's a huge emotional component involved. So that's how I would decide on a topic. What excites me? What am I passionate about? How to begin then? So I like to begin with my protagonist in action. It doesn't have to be a matter of skiing down a mountain slope with the baddies firing machine guns at you as you weave between the pine trees. It can be your protagonist walking along a riverbank. It can be an animated discussion between your protagonist and someone they disagree with. And for God's sake, don't write a discussion in which two people agree with each other. That's not drama. We're not going to talk about that, but it's a huge element of writing compelling fiction. It doesn't really matter whether this scene survives into the final draft of the story. But getting the first scene down starts the process of generating momentum. One scene leads to the next. And since you have in mind at least a vague idea, I'll talk in a later answer that I give about that process of planning, of where your story is going, it won't be difficult to write the second scene. And you're away. The beginning of a story is almost always easier than the end. There's a piece of wisdom that Hollywood earnestly quotes, and that is that if you haven't spent 80% of your time writing your screenplay working on the end, you don't have a screenplay. But the beginning is easier because you've thought about it for so long, and it unfolds relatively simply. So that's how to begin. And finally, a few of you ask the essential question: where do you find time to write? How do you find time to write? Well, of course, circumstances differ. I personally think that a routine is essential. If you have ring-fenced an hour every morning from 5 to 6, perhaps, before anyone else has any call on you, or 4 hours a week on Thursday nights, perhaps, or Saturday mornings, and let everyone know that you're simply not available between those times, then I think you've got the start of a routine going. Trollope wrote from 5 to 7 in the morning, every day, in longhand. He had an arduous day job. He managed to write 47 600 to 800 page novels. He's not a bad role model to follow.
Okay.
Over to you, Josie.
Thanks. Well, as Richard said, we received an enormous number of questions this month on a wide range of topics. You wanted to know about the difficulties of fitting writing into a busy life, about motivation, about finding discipline and overcoming writer's block. But what struck us particularly was the number of you asked questions that required quite practical answers about craft. You asked about getting started, about character, story development, planning and structure, about dialogue, scenes, showing, not telling. And we were quite excited about that because this underlines for us what we have always said, that craft lies at the heart of your development as writers. Learn the skills, you will instantly become better writers. You, all of you who are attending or who signed up at least, you clearly care about the craft, about your writing and about becoming the best writers you can possibly be. This shone through the questions you asked us. We'll try to give as much time as we possibly can in this hour available to us. We won't be this time answering your questions individually, one by one, because many of you covered the same ground. Instead, we have taken all your questions and divided them into topics in order to try and give answers to nearly everyone's questions in the time available. Some questions we could have easily spent half an hour on alone, and some were directed at very specific situations. So we'll be contacting some of those people afterwards and seeing if we can set up ways in which we can help them more specifically than we can answering these questions generally right now. But what became abundantly clear as we went through your questions was how all of them are in fact answered in our creative writing course. It's our flagship course, and we've developed it over the years. We've had all about writing. The topics raised are all there, and that's because when we designed the course, we set out specifically to cover all the practical skills we thought you would need to embark on a work of fiction or creative nonfiction. We like to think it's a little treasure trove of craft. Richard.
Okay, the man at the window has moved on, fortunately. I was on mute while he was making an incredible racket outside, so I hope you didn't hear it. All right, a number of you, and I'm talking about Frankie Francis and Jane Tolmie, raised questions about motivation and its opposite, which I guess one of its opposites is self-doubt. Now, Frankie Francis is one of our former mentees. She was on our mentorship program. And during that time, she wrote and published a lovely memoir about her career as an endurance horse rider. That's nice, a horse rider. She wondered how one might fight self-doubt. And now the extraordinary coincidence about this is that for those of you who've read today's Monday Motivation, you will realize that that is precisely the question that I answered today. And the first thing I said there was, you must acknowledge it. So self-doubt is a variety of fear, right? It's doubting, it's fearing your own ability to get to grips with your story or your characters. So you begin by saying, I am fearful and I'm not scared to admit it, a little bit like Alcoholics Anonymous. My name is Richard and I am a self-doubter, all right? Having acknowledged it, you remind yourself of what you have committed yourself to. Your commitment is to writing your story. Your commitment is to writing that memoir or that novel. That commitment constitutes a challenge to yourself, right? And you will discover that when you recast your doubt or your fear as a challenge, you're much more likely to rise to the occasion and not be paralyzed by it. Simple, eh? I, in fact, developed a cocktail which contains all of those ingredients, which you can read about if you go to my Monday Motivation today. Jane Tolmie wondered how you stay motivated. And I thought about it, and I thought, actually, that's a little bit like writing a book. When you're writing something that will eventually be 200 or 300 or 400 pages long, you have to remind yourself continually that today, all you're doing is writing this scene, just one scene. And as the writer E.L. Doctorow said, writing a book, writing a long manuscript, is like driving a car through the night. All you can see is what your headlights illuminate, but that's enough to get you to your destination. A scene is what your headlights illuminate, but that's enough. And I think motivation works in the same way. You don't have to worry about whether you'll be motivated next week or next month. Today is what you focus on. And today, there's just that scene or that character that you want to develop or that storyline that you want to tinker with. And of course, I would be remiss if I didn't end this little lecturette on saying that you can, of course, read my Monday morning motivations.
Okay. Are you finished? Yeah.
I'm finished.
All right. So now I'm going to carry on from there and answer. There were many of you who asked about overcoming procrastination, writer's block, and emotional space. So I won't name you all, but there were lots of you. I'll try to give you a couple of practical aids which have helped me. I swim every day in what becomes, in the heart of winter, very chilly water. If I thought about it, as I lay in my warm bed, if I gave myself a choice, I wouldn't get up. Instead, I don't consider how cold the water will be or how my skin will tingle or sting as I immerse myself in it for the first time. I just get up and I put my costume on because that's what I do. And I think that's how we must always treat our writing practice. Don't give yourself a choice. Don't think about it. Firstly, map out the time, and Richard's spoken about that, but I just want to add that it won't miraculously appear. I agree that you need to map it out. It won't, and magical inspiration, neither of those things will miraculously appear. If you don't ring fence that time, if you don't plan it into your week, it will be gobbled up by everything else in your life, and you'll say, oh, I just didn't have time. You have to plot it, plan it, put it into your week, and ring fence it. And yes, as one of you pointed out in your question, other people don't respect your writing time as work. So lie. I spent the entire time I was writing my first book lying about non-existent deadlines and jobs that needed to be done. You don't have to tell people what you're doing, just lie. So when you've mapped out that time, then place yourself in front of your screen without thinking, because yes, your mind will tell you, oh, I can't write today, I have no ideas, no inspiration. It's the icy water. Just do it. If you need to, make it a habit to start with a short meditation when you sit down at your screen, just so that your heart doesn't flutter, because yes, it's scary. I mean, I've published 5 books, and when I sit down to write, my heart flutters and I get nervous and I think I won't be able to do it. So yes, breathe a little bit. If you need to do 5 minutes of free writing to get into the creative flow. But then stare at the screen. And if you stare at that screen long enough, something will appear. I find that little rituals help. So if you have a beloved pair of slippers that you can dedicate just to writing, keep those as your writing slippers. A favorite pen, which becomes your creative writing pen, take it out and put it beside you. Then your creative mind will start to associate those little rituals with the act of creation. It will help to put you in the zone.
You'll
Some of you
behave like
asked,
Pavlov's dog.
yes, exactly. Some of you asked about emotional space. That was the topic of the last newsletter. And as a writing coach, I'm used to advising writers to carve out the physical time to write. But that newsletter made me think a little bit further, because of my own experiences and those of others. And I've come to realize that Virginia Woolf's famous room of one's own doesn't just refer to the physical environment. You have to find that room within yourself, particularly if you're going through grief or emotional turmoil. Here again, rituals help. Free writing can allow an outlet for those feelings and free a little bit of that space within you. Whatever you're comfortable with, meditation, yoga, swimming, running, all of these can help clear the debris and put you in the moment and clear some of that emotional space for creativity. I also believe do something tactile. I knit obsessively. But if cooking grabs you, or drawing or mosaicing, do it in odd moments when you've got time. Doodle. If you're doing something creatively tactile, you're in the moment instead of focusing on the turmoil in your head. And finally, sometimes this is hard, depending on what you're going through, but don't lose the child in you. Do something ridiculous. Eat an ice cream. Do something playful. And if it gives you joy, do it. I believe strongly that being a writer means never letting go of the child inside us. Okay, Richard.
Okay, so the child inside me, whenever I think about the structure of a novel or a memoir, has a little conniption, because it's not easy. Structure is not easy. And that's what a number of your questions relate to. You know, how do you structure a long work of fiction? How do you structure a memoir? Is there an ideal structure? You know, some people say, well, Hollywood has got it down to a fine equation, a formula. But actually, we know that if something appears to be too formulaic, it fails. So, but can we plan something in advance? Should we plan a novel in advance? Now, we know the difference between the planners and the pantsers, right? Those who plan, sometimes in meticulous detail, how their stories will unfold, they are the planners. And those who allow the inspiration of the moment to guide them, they are the people who fly by the seats of their pants. They are the pantsers. Now, the fact is that I think it's a matter of temperament, of your own particular psychology, because both methods work. I would argue, however, that you're more likely to be slightly, well, I'm going to withdraw what I'm going to say before I say it, but let me say it anyway. You're more likely to write more if you're a planner. You're more likely to write more swiftly if you're a planner. And I will take as my example of somebody who's a pantser and who takes forever and a day to write a novel, Donna Tartt doesn't plan anything, famously. She writes this scene and then she writes that scene. She doesn't know who the characters are. She doesn't know what the story is. And gradually over the years, the decade, all of these scenes start to coalesce. Then she rewrites and rewrites and rewrites, and she comes out with a book. She writes one book every decade, all right? And that's fine, particularly if you're in the habit of writing masterpieces. But for most of us who are not, writing completely without planning is, I think, a bad idea. I don't believe in writing a very meticulously worked out plan in advance, because the slightest change to that plan can derail the whole thing and you've got to start again. But I do think that you need to know a number of key things about your story. And this is where structure comes into play. So the question is, what are those essential tent poles? Okay, I call them tent poles, the events or the incidents that hold up the fabric of your story, because that, in a way, is the definition of your structure. So to begin at the beginning, you need to know where your story starts, chronologically speaking. That's not always self-evident. You need to know who your protagonist protagonist is, again, it's not always obvious. And you need critically to know what your protagonist wants. Now, I know we say this in practically every webinar, whatever the subject of the webinar, it always somehow comes up. But it is really, really important. You need to know what your protagonist really wants. As we've said before, story is about someone who wants something, who finds herself having to fight for that against the opposition of what we might call the forces of antagonism. And those three factors, those three elements, lead you straight into structure. And a shape begins to emerge from the shadows. Your protagonist wants something. She might have wanted it for some time, or she might discover for the first time that she wants it. So here are examples. She might want to be a model. She always dreamt of being a model from the time she was a little girl. Her parents are dead set against it for a host of reasons. Plus, the agents she talks to say she's too big or too short. She needs to lose weight or grow if she possibly can. She needs to become a nymph, right? Or your protagonist might be a guy who's engaged to be married to a fabulous woman who fulfills every fantasy he's ever had of a partner. On the eve of their wedding, she disappears. Now, what does he want? He wants to find her. Okay, it's the most important desire in his life. But he discovers that someone has abducted her. Her kidnappers make no demands and issue no threats, but they are very clearly his antagonists, until at least he learns late in the story that she was complicit in her own disappearance. Then she becomes an antagonist as well, and his mission changes. He doesn't want to find her so much as find out what game she and they were playing. Another way of looking at the start of your story is through the lens of the hero's journey, which is a very powerful template. It suggests that every story starts off with your protagonist living in his familiar or ordinary world. He is then called on an adventure. In the case of our poor deluded bachelor, his adventure really begins with the discovery that his fiancée has disappeared. He abandons his life as a safe pair of hands at an accounting firm, and he takes on the mantle of an investigator. This decision, which the hero responds to the call of adventure by saying yes, marks the end of Act 1. All right? That's the first major unit of your structure, Act 1. He now finds himself in unfamiliar territory. He has to learn some basic investigative skills. The police suggest there's no reason to suspect foul play. The delectable bride simply had second thoughts, so they declined to investigate themselves. Our bachelor has to explore regions alien to him. Perhaps he has to fly to foreign climes in pursuit of clues he's unearthed, countries whose language he doesn't speak, whose customs are unfamiliar to him. There he undergoes a series of increasingly arduous and even hazardous trials and tests. These tests and trials are full of jeopardy and suspense. He comes close to losing his life or his mind or his way. The hero eventually confronts his antagonists. It's a searing and jolting experience. He learns, for instance, this is the point, that his bride, far from being the victim that he had up to that point supposed her to be, was in fact part of the conspiracy. He loses his innocence, his trust in her. He undergoes what film writers refer to as the dark night of the soul. He emerges from this dark period with a fresh conviction that he will track her down and challenge her. And by the way, this climax, this high point of the story so far, invariably marks the end of Act 2. In the third act, our hero has a final encounter with the antagonist, whom he has now learned is the woman he once loved. but the scales have been stripped from his eyes, and he is able to counter her guiles and her manipulation. He finds out the truth, and he takes the truth back to his ordinary world, and that is the end of his journey. Now, that's the hero's journey. There are many other templates that writers use to help them structure their 300 to 400 page odysseys. There's, just to name one amongst many others, the 8-point story arc. Now, you can find these everywhere on the website, on the internet, and believe me, they really are useful. Now, one of you, Marita Buerta, I think, asked us to say something about writing a series. Now, I'm going to assume that you're not talking about a television series. If you are, then do contact me independently, because it deserves a longer conversation that I don't have time for now. But if it's a novel series, a sequence of novels, then here are my thoughts. Writing the first novel in a sequence is just like writing any novel, right? Writing the second is both more complicated and easier. It's easier because by now you've developed your major characters. You won't need to spend ages thinking about them. You already know them. You know how they react in given situations. You know how they talk. You know what their habits are. You know their world. But it's more difficult because you are now constrained by what you have already established about your characters. You can't suddenly make your protagonist an orphan after you established in your first novel that her parents are alive and well and living in Pretoria, all right? Their backstories are at least partly established, and that can make life difficult for you. But writing a series of novels is a great idea from a marketing point of view. Readers who have already bought and, of course, loved that first novel really don't need much persuasion to buy the second. And this explains why so many novels, detective, fantasy, science fiction, are not parts of long and sometimes very long series. Which takes me to you, Josie.
Okay.
Another long series.
Yes. And I want to say, in the end, it all comes down to character. This is the foremost aspect of your story. When in doubt, or if you get stuck, always come back to this. It's your touchstone. So, as Richard said, who is your character, what they want, and also what they need, and whether this is different from what they want, will determine the kind of story you're telling. It's also the basis for what will keep your readers glued to the page. A lot of you asked about that. We don't read to be treated to a litany of events. Events don't make story. We don't care about car chases, political machinations, unless they affect someone we care about. Story depends on character. Our empathy determines that we'll identify with the wants and needs of your character and the obstacles that they face. What this means is that you need to know your character incredibly well, inside out, intimately, in all their facets, with all their complexities. We can sense immediately if a character is a cipher, with no quirks and contradictions, with no flaws, or equally in the case of a villain, no good points. In every scene, we need to see a real, believable character who has a full life and who shows us aspects of themselves and their world beyond the narrow progression of the plot line. In practical terms, that requires you to work out who your character is before you write the first words of your story. There are many ways to do this. Some people work visually, others scribble notes. Some people take a real character and then change and build on them. We don't have the time here to go into all those practicalities. But what I want to say is don't stint. And don't forget, Your character will continue developing through the story. The more you put them through, the more they will change and grow. So consider that too. One of you asked about character arc, and that's what it is. Your character starts somewhere, faces many obstacles and trials, and ends up somewhere else, if only in their own head. And as I said, character is at the heart of keeping your readers engaged. We need to care or be intrigued by your main character. If they're simply awful or they aren't drawn vividly enough, we won't care about what becomes of them, and it'll be a struggle to follow their journey. Another way to keep readers interested is to keep the stakes high. If there isn't much at stake for them, we won't be that engaged. In other words, if they're faced with losing a job, but they don't particularly care about that job and they have a healthy trust fund, then the stakes aren't very high and we're not that deeply engaged. This doesn't always mean physical stakes. They could have a great deal to lose. They could be faced with losing their life, certainly, but they could also have a great deal to lose emotionally or spiritually. And we could be as strongly drawn, I sometimes think even more so, by a character who faces losing his faith or his belief in humanity, or a child who tries to find a much-loved toy or to send a letter to God in order to heal his mother, as we are by the character who sets out to save the country or the world from nuclear annihilation or a deadly epidemic. And the other thing to say about keeping your reader glued is to keep us guessing. Don't tell us everything, even non-essential information. If you raise questions in our minds, we'll read on to find the answers. We were asked to talk about description, but I prefer to talk about detail. The word description tends to make people think of long paragraphs of flowery adjectival writing that holds up the flow of the story. Detail, though, is essential. I sometimes like to say that skillful use of detail can separate good writing from mediocre. It doesn't have to come in long tranches. A carefully chosen detail can bring a character or setting into sharp focus for us. Details are immersive. They allow us to visualize the world of the story and to be there with the characters. They show us more about the characters themselves. And remember, in saying that details work on different levels. What a character notices certainly will show us more about the setting or the other characters that they're noticing. But their observations also give us a sense of who they are and their mood. The other day I was reading a book, and in it a disgruntled character who hadn't had any sleep noticed that the sunrise reminded him of a conjunctivitis-infected eye. Now that certainly tells us more about who he is and his state of mind. Important aspects to remember with detail are these. Weave them through the action and dialogue. Don't put paragraphs of unrelieved detail. And be specific. Rely on strong nouns and verbs rather than adjectives, and use all your senses. Okay, a brief look at memoir. A lot of you asked about memoir. Always remember that a memoir is still a story like any other. Life is not a story. A memoir is a story taken from life, drawn from life. It's a construct created from the details of your life. In other words, you're not going to write a litany of events that carry us from birth to the present day. You're going to consider what aspect or time of your life is worth covering and what your character's arc or journey is through that story, it still comes back to that essential character. Who are you and what do you want at the start of the story you're considering telling? And what do you face through the course of the tale? What obstacles do you face? And where do you end up? Write it in scenes. Show as much as you can, recreating the scenes from your life and the dialogue to the best of your ability. We know you can't remember the exact words that were spoken. Just stick as closely as you can to the way you remember it. Know to answer a couple of your questions. You can't make things up or exaggerate things to make a point. But you can, you can, but then it becomes fiction. But yes, you can select what to include based on what carries the story forward. And yes, you can recreate scenes vividly for us despite your imperfect memory. Every memoir will offend people, by the way. My advice is write it. It's your story and you have a right to it. Park the worry about offending people till the end. Revising's a big subject, and there's several levels to this, and we've covered a lot in past webinars. I'm going to just whiz through it. First, there's the rewrite phase, and I would say go into this phase as a kind stranger. Judge the flow of it, and I would say print it out, because that distances you from it and you can approach it like a kind stranger. Look at the flow, whether you get bored, whether it jumps, whether it goes off at a tangent. And I would also say make a detailed synopsis, a scene by scene synopsis, describing what happens in every scene in one sentence. If you can't say what happens in that scene in one sentence, then you know that scene's got a big problem. Then you go back to your computer when you've finished doing that, and you do the first of what may be many rewrites. J.M. Coetzee never does fewer than 12, apparently. Only then do you come to true revising, which is the sentence and word level. That's when you look at the sentences. Could you express something better? Is your dialogue realistic? So don't consider that you'll be the one writer in the universe who will produce a perfect first draft. Much real writing happens at the rewrite stage. And for one of you who wanted to know how to kick their butt into the rewrite, Sal, I think that was you. Remember that this phase can be the most rewarding. You no longer have to face a blank screen. You have the material to play with, and you can see the quality of your work transforming before your eyes. So just start and you will find joy in it. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Jose. I've got a question here, at least a couple of questions that we grouped together, and then with my usual inattention, I developed an answer for one of them. So I'll see what I can do about the other. The two topics were dialogue and showing, not telling, which a number of you raised. Now, my feeling is that showing and telling is by far the more important one, although I have a very special love relationship with writing dialogue. But I'm going to talk about showing and telling. Of course, one of the prime ways of showing is using dialogue, but I'll get on to that. On our creative writing course, we use a very specific metaphor to explain the difference between showing and telling. And because I can't think of a better one, I'm going to use that one now. The man has just come up next to the window. He might be an assassin, but I'll just let him do what he will. Okay. Let me start by telling you what the distinction is between showing and telling. All right, I'm going to use the word telling in its specialist writerly sense. Then I will use my metaphor to show you what the difference is between showing and telling. And then I will argue why the one is so much more dramatic than the other, but why at the same time, almost every novel or memoir ever written is a judicious mix of the two. So here's the tell. Telling is asserting. It consists of explanation. So if I tell you that, quote, Harold was a reticent man who enjoyed the company of his cat more than he did of any human being he'd ever met, I would simply be explaining an important aspect of his character. That is a tell. Here's the show. Showing is revealing Harold's reticence in the context of one or more scenes in which he shows his solitary nature in action. There are any number of ways of doing this, and I will leave them up to your imagination. Because frankly, it would take me too long. Showing always takes longer than telling. It would take me too long to write a scene and then read it out to you, which demonstrates that Harold is a reticent person. Now, here's my metaphor. Imagine that you are a spectator sitting in the public gallery of a court of law. The man in the dock is accused of the murder of his wife. The prosecutor stands up to make his opening statement. He says something like this. Your Honor, the man in the dock, Stephen Smith, on the 25th of January, deliberately and with malice aforethought, shot his wife Cynthia 3 times, killing her. 4 months before the murder, he took out a policy on his life for $5 million. He was the sole beneficiary of that policy. 3 weeks before the murder, he bought a handgun, a .25 Beretta from a gunsmith in Kent Avenue in the city, and a box of bullets. The night before the killing, he had several double whiskeys in the local hotel and was overheard to boast about how he would soon be rid of what he called his trouble and strife, which is to say, his wife. On the night of the murder, his neighbors reported overhearing a very loud argument in the Smith apartment, which was followed by the sound of 3 gunshots. At this point, the prosecutor pauses and then says smugly, Your Honor, the state rests its case. Now, nobody's going to find him guilty. Why? Because he has proved nothing. That is telling. It is an assertion without evidence. But if, over the course of the next few days, that prosecutor had called a series of witnesses, the insurance agent, the gunsmith, the drinkers at the bar in the hotel, the neighbors, and got them to testify to what they'd witnessed, and moreover produced whatever documentary evidence there might be, the insurance policy, the receipt for the purchase of the gun, and so on, then I think we would be satisfied that the prosecutor has proved his case. That is showing. In other words, showing is a matter of giving your reader the evidence that they need to be convinced that something real has happened in your fictional or your non-fictional world. And you do this best by writing in scenes in which your characters act and talk, there's dialogue, and in the case of your protagonist, think and feel. Your reader will then feel like someone standing on the stage, invisible to the actors, but able to experience with them the events taking place. They will see the bullet piercing poor Cynthia Smith's chest. They will hear her fall with a thump to the floor. They will watch as Stephen Smith disposes of the gun in the leg. They will enjoy the sight of justice being done in the courtroom and of Stephen Smith being led to the cells to begin his 20-year sentence. I'm going to end this diatribe, this rant, by repeating something I said months ago in a blog. We must remember what the point of creative writing is. It's to provide opportunities for the reader to actively participate in the story. Books, both novels and memoirs, are interfaces between the writer and the reader. They are only completed when a reader engages with what a writer has written. So the question we should continually ask ourselves is, have we given enough points of sensory and emotionally dramatic purchase for the reader? Sensory and emotionally dramatic purchase for the reader. This is the rationale for showing and not telling. I hope that makes sense. So, it follows then that all creative writing should consist solely of showing and not telling, right? Well, no. Because the one disadvantage, as I've already said, of showing is that it takes many more words than telling. You can tell us that Harold was a reticent person in a line. There, I've just done it. But to show that might take many scenes. So in every story, there are passages which cover not very dramatic periods of the protagonist's life or story that must necessarily be told if you're to understand his journey. For instance, for 3 weeks, your protagonist might have had to hang around waiting for the DNA test results to be returned to him. During that waiting period, many things happened that are not particularly germane to the story or dramatic, but you want to emphasize his growing impatience. So you might write 3 paragraphs telling us in broad outline what he did while his impatience increased to boiling point. Okay. That brings us to the end of the real content, the stuff that you came to hear. Now I'm going to tell you something that you might not have come to hear, but you expect to hear. Because in the end, we're a writing company and we run writing courses. And as Josie said at the start of today's webinar, our creative writing course deals with all of the subjects that we've talked about this evening, and talks about them in greater depth and gives you assignments to do and gives you written feedback on what you do. So, Josie, I'm just skipping ahead because we've run out of time. So our creative writing course takes you through the entire process of creative writing, from developing your own distinctive writing style or voice, to generating ideas, to shaping story. In other words, there's much more on story structure, for instance, than I had time to deal with today, to writing scenes and dialogue, which I just touched on, to creating suspense, to writing a compelling beginning, to keeping readers on the edge of their seats through that long and often tricky Act 2, to showing and not telling. You can see how the course overlaps with what we've said today. Each of the 10 modules ends with an assignment to which Joanne or I give detailed and sympathetic feedback. Our motto has always been, we're honest but kind. I sometimes add that Joanne at least is kind, but that's a joke. We're both honest and we're both kind. In addition to the exercises, you'll also have the chance to join our monthly Writers' Circle for the duration of the course, during which we discuss writerly issues, gossip, and read bits of our work to the other participants and get advice and support from us all. And there's a bonus that we're offering as well as all of that. And folks, there's more. We've devised a 30-day course, which we've called the 30-Day Writing Boot Camp. Each day for a full month, we will send you notes and a writing prompt, which you can respond to in your own time. And the final assignment of that, which is designed to pull together many of the skills that we deal with in that course, Joanne and I will give you feedback on that. Now that 30-day writing boot camp can be yours for absolutely nothing for those of you who register for the creative writing course. And it'll help bed down the new skills that course has helped you develop. And I think you'll have a hell of a lot of fun with it. So, with 3 minutes in hand, we have come to the end of today's webinar. We haven't answered every question, and I guess that there are probably more questions in the chat that we haven't got time to get to. But there's always next month's webinar and the webinar after that. So do not despair. We will be back, and I hope that you will be too.
And I want to say thank you very much. And just to add to that, yeah, somebody asked about writing groups, and we think writing groups can be very, very helpful, because after all, no one understands you like another writer. And that's why we've structured all about writing the way we have, with the kind of offerings from our mentoring program and our writers circle. We've tried to create a community for you and to give these webinars that draw you in and make you feel that you're not alone out there. So that's why we have structured and developed all about writing in the way that we have. So yeah, I hope that we can serve that purpose for the writers struggling out there. Otherwise, we hope that we make it slightly less of a lonely business.
That's it, folks. Thank you very much again.